2024 has been another bumper year for upping the ante in the action camera wars. We've seen both the DJI Action 5 Pro and the Insta360 Ace Pro 2 bringing features such as ultra long battery life, more efficient processors, and some really quite astounding low light modes which leverage the power of the aforementioned processors. But what about GoPro? This year saw the release of the HERO14 Black, which, while it is a good action camera with some interesting add-on capabilities such as the macro lens mod and the forthcoming anamorphic lens mod, it's fair to say that unless you're using these additional lenses, the HERO13 doesn't offer existing HERO12 users much of a reason to upgrade, nor did it address features that have seen its rivals surge ahead. I like GoPro's cameras. I still think that in terms of how the image looks, particularly with the GP log picture profile, it still gives one of the most pleasing looking images of all the action cameras. While the DJI Action 5 Pro looks okay, it's still somewhat electronic looking and over sharpened even at the lowest sharpness settings. The Ace Pro 2 lacks a 10-bit colour mode and its log picture profile is just plain weird looking. The GoPro is also the most flexible action camera when it comes to slow motion, with 240 frames per second being available in 2.7K and even higher frame rates in a burst mode at lower resolutions. The sheer tunability of the GoPro, particularly with the Labs firmware, still gives it an edge that I feel is underestimated by lots of people I talk to. That said, this year I've been taking my Osmo Action 5 Pro out with me more, and that's simply because of battery life. So, with all that in mind, these are the features that I think GoPro simply can't ignore with next year's HERO14 release. In fact, I think these features will be essential at a bare minimum if the company is to remain competitive. And no, I'm not going to be recommending a 1-inch sensor. I've given my reasons why this would be a terrible idea for an action camera in a previous video. Although that's not to say that I don't think it would be a good idea for a company like GoPro to make a totally separate, waterproof, larger sensor lifestyle vlogging camera with a similar form factor to an action camera, perhaps with autofocus and maybe its own waterproof, high-quality wireless microphone system with its own onboard audio backup recording for use in and around water. I actually think this would be a great way for GoPro to break out of the pure action camera market. But I digress, so let's get into what I think the GoPro HERO14 Black must have. It's long since time that GoPro upgraded the processor within its action cameras. The GP2, which is the current processor, uses a 7nm fabrication process, and it's one of the main blocks to the camera making significant gains in battery life and thermal performance. With the Action 5 Pro using a 4nm process and the Ace Pro 2 using two 5nm chips, GoPro simply can't afford another year with the GP2. Now, I've long felt that the HERO13 was likely due to have a GP3 chip inside it, but that it simply wasn't ready in time. A similar thing happened with the HERO9, which was originally supposed to use a GP2, but delays in its development meant that it couldn't be used. It's important that the HERO14 uses a much finer process chip so that we can finally lay to rest any issues with thermal shutdowns or low battery life. With the Action 5 Pro able to shoot 4K at 30 frames per second for nearly 2 hours and 45 minutes continuously while barely getting lukewarm in my own tests, it's absolutely imperative that GoPro meets this challenge next year. But this also comes with a warning. Having a 5nm chip would be a useful advancement for the Hero series, but it might already be obsolete. The Action 5 already has a 4nm chip, so it's not beyond possibility that any new camera from DJI or Insta360 next year might feature a 3nm processor, furthering the battery life and thermal performance even more, as well as allowing for even more advanced low light processing. Battery life goes hand in hand with the new processor, but it's worth reiterating once again because it is so important. Battery life is often a single reason why someone would purchase one action camera over another. Certainly when it comes to outdoor sports, you don't want to have to keep worrying about changing the battery, particularly when you're out in the cold, wind, rain and in or around water. I've used the Osmo Action 5 Pro for an entire kayaking trip before, and I've still had 60% battery left at the end. Along with a good wide lens for POV, battery life is one of the most important features for me. Fast charging is something that all other action camera makers have embraced. The fact that you can charge a camera like the Action 5 to 80% capacity in 15 minutes is a huge bonus. I've lost count of the number of times that I might want to take the camera somewhere, but I've forgotten to charge it. I'm a bit scatterbrained like that. Fast charging is something that really should be in every device by now. I don't know the reasons why it hasn't been included in the GoPro yet, but if it isn't in the HERO14, questions need to be asked. GoPro has been using basically the same lens for multiple generations of camera now, and it's long since time that it was upgraded. The max lens mod and ultra wide style lens accessories are all very well and good, but they're vulnerable, they attract water droplets despite the hydrophobic coating on the new model, and they add noticeable bulk and weight for helmet mounting. I love the angle of view they give, but it's time now to bring a new wide angle to the Hero series without the need for additional accessories. While we're at it, we can also kill off super view and hyper view modes with their hyper distortion. The new Hero camera has a 165° FOV for its built-in lens. Put something similar on a Hero Black along with 8x7 and 1x1 ratio modes, and you have a recipe for the most killer POV ultra-wide on the market. And instead of hyperview with its dynamic stretching, a new processor could be asked to perform lens curvature correction on the 8x7 or 1x1 image in a similar manner to the way the lens correction plugin within DaVinci Resolve works, which can straighten out edges while minimizing the crop at the top and bottom of the image while placing it in a 16:9 frame. Imagine that, a distortion-free image, similar in look to a Leica 0D lens, but without the large crop that you see in GoPro's traditional linear mode. Although the interface on the GoPro has improved over the years, the touchscreen responsiveness really does lag behind the performance of its rivals. Both the Ace Pro 2 and the Action 5 feature touchscreen interfaces that perform almost as responsively as a smartphone, even when they're wet. If any of you have tried using a GoPro with wet hands, you'll know how frustrating it is. This has to change. I also think that a front touchscreen would be an important decision. Both of GoPro's main rivals feature the ability to either flip up a screen to be front-facing or have a touchscreen front display for changing settings. It's extremely useful when mounting the car or when using selfie sticks and other situations. In the past, I've been a bit dismissive of low light modes on action cameras. However, recently my mind has been changed as I see just how many people have been using their action cameras for nighttime mountain biking or even just vlogging in a city at night. Sometimes even in my own sport of kayaking, in the winter you can end up in some dingy conditions if you're late off the river. The low light modes on the Ace Pro 2 and Action 5 Pro are very good indeed. In fact, the most recent firmware for the Action 5 improved the super night mode so much that whereas once it wasn't quite as good as the Ace Pro 2, now it noticeably surpasses it in terms of image quality. It's now finally time for GoPro to acknowledge that its cameras need some form of low light mode to keep up with the competition. The reality is that it's the processors in the Ace Pro 2 and Action 5 Pro that allows those cameras to feature such good low light modes. The GP2 processor just isn't up to the task of the advanced processing required for such a mode, which is why it's so important that the HERO14 features a big update to its processing chip. Insta360 had the right idea when it created a clip-on wind filter for the Ace Pro 2. It isn't so effective in wet conditions where the camera gets submerged, but overall it offers a noticeable improvement when using the camera in most scenarios. Wind noise has always been an issue with action cameras, and no matter how much in-camera digital wind production is performed, along with automatic switching of microphones, the result is usually always poor. There's simply no substitute for a physical wind filter. Maybe GoPro could improve things even more and place a windscreen behind a waterproof membrane that is porous but with holes so tiny that individual water droplets can't pass through, in a similar way to how the breathable membrane works in waterproof clothing or the Surf Ears earplugs. Either way, I don't think it's an insurmountable problem to solve, or at the very least drastically improve. Now, you might have noticed that I haven't mentioned a new sensor here, and that's because at the time of this video going out, the IMX677L sensor that GoPro uses still hasn't received an upgrade. But the IMX677L still has capabilities that GoPro hasn't fully utilised yet, and once again it's likely that a new processor will be required to use them. As many of you know, the HERO14 featured some new ultra slow motion modes, but they were of fairly low resolution. The HERO13 can record 5.3K at 120 frames per second, but only for short bursts. A new processor would potentially allow the camera to deal with 5.3K at 120 frames per second continuously, although that does assume that the imaging chip itself doesn't overheat at such frame rates. There's also the potential to use higher frame rates such as 120 frames per second in the 8:7 ratio in 2.7K mode. Other sensors are available, as we've seen from rival cameras. The sticking point is whether GoPro would give up the square ratio modes like 8:7 and 1:1. I'm not so sure that it would, particularly given that the ability to shoot footage that can be reframed easily to vertical, square and 16:9 ratios without compromising resolution is one of the GoPro's USPs. Whatever happens in 2025, it'll be an interesting year once again for action camera development. But when it comes to GoPro, it's imperative that it places itself on the front foot once again and takes the battle directly to its rivals instead of playing catch up. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I really like GoPro as a company. I love how so many of its employees genuinely love the outdoors and adventure, and how it doesn't feel corporate to deal with. I also get what the company is trying to do with the GP Lens Mod series, but I think now is the time for the company to do something that genuinely trounces the competition right out of the box without the need for add-ons. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below, and if you do like this content, please do like and subscribe. It'll make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside.